Welcome to the deep dive. You came to us with a truly fascinating and really quite unusual set of sources today.
Yes, these transcripts from multiple Grafasi method hypnosis sessions.
Right, where individuals are claiming to access this, well, esoteric information about the Vatican, the recent death of Pope Francis, and, the hidden forces may be playing out behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's quite a stack of material.
So our mission, as always, is to really unpack this, to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from this unique material you've provided. We want to offer you, the listener, a shortcut to being well-informed on a topic that, frankly, raises some profound questions about reality, about power.
Definitely.
We're going to explore how these investigators, using this method, claim to sort through just vast amounts of perceived information to find what they consider reliable.
Which is a huge challenge in itself.
Absolutely. And then we'll delve into the surprising, sometimes really unsettling narratives that emerged when multiple individuals were guided into this hypnotic state to explore the inner workings of the Catholic Church and its highest figures.
Yeah, get ready for some truly mind-bending perceptions, common threads that are hard to just dismiss easily.
And specific stories, too, right, from individuals under hypnosis that might just turn your understanding of reality completely inside out.
That's the potential, yes. So diving into this, the first thing that really stands out, I think, is the very particular methodology these sources describe for gathering information in a hypnotic state.
Okay.
What's fascinating here, and they're very open about this, is that they acknowledge a significant, almost overwhelming challenge.
Which is?
The extremely high percentage of contamination and distortion in information received during just a single hypnosis session.
Contamination, distortion.
Yeah, imagine trying to speak with someone underwater,
Yeah.
right? Through several layers of static, maybe, while they're also speaking different languages. That's kind of the analogy one source uses.
Wow.
To describe how information gets warped as it travels through dimensions, densities, and crucially, the hypnotized person's own mind, their beliefs, their culture, their past experiences. It's not just a little interference. It's perceived as a fundamental hurdle.
So, if a single session is inherently that unreliable, I mean, how on earth did they claim to get anything useful out of it? It sounds less like a precise method and more like, I don't know, trying to find a needle in a cosmic haystack, doesn't it?
It does sound like that, and they basically agree. The sources emphatically state that information from a lone hypnosis session is, and this is a quote, absolutely counterproductive and useless if you take it as factual instruction or memorized data. They're very clear on this.
So, not useless overall, but useless as straight fact.
Exactly. The purpose of information from a single session isn't to be a definitive truth. Rather, it's viewed as more like a vehicle of movement, a sort of energetic pointer. Yeah, designed to guide the operator, the hypnotist, towards the client's underlying esoteric problem. It helps them identify the cause of an issue so they can then work on resolving it. So it's about dynamic guidance, not static, objective data collection in that initial stage.
Okay, so a single session is just this vehicle of movement, a starting point. How do they then separate what they call fact from illusion in this subliminal world? This is where the real filtering starts, I guess.
Oh.
How do they even begin to find reliability in such a vast ocean of perceived noise?
Indeed, and this is absolutely the crux of their claimed methodology. The key, they explain, lies in a really rigorous multi-session, team-based investigative process.
Theme-based.
Yes, they conduct what they call cycles of investigation that can involve, well, tens, hundreds, even thousands of sessions, with different individuals, mind you, who have good or excellent hypnotic susceptibility.
Thousands. That's a lot.
An immense amount. And from this huge volume of information, they extract only what is equal to all or almost all sessions. This common thread, this repeated answer across diverse individuals, that is what they consider reliable information.
So it's like consensus building, but in hypnosis.
In a way, yes. Their unique form of consensus building in these energetic realms. One source dramatically quantifies this, stating that only a very low percentage, maybe 3% or 2-3%, of the total information gathered is actually considered reliable.
Wait, only 2 or 3%?
That's what they claim. The rest, they literally call junk information or garbage.
Wow, 97% junk. That really underscores the challenge, the inherent unreliability they seem to be grappling with.
Absolutely. It means they believe they're mining for these minuscule grains of truth in an ocean of noise. It's like as they put it, filtering sand from a vast riverbed to find just those tiny precious grains of gold.
But the river's always shifting and the gold might look different.
Exactly. And maybe some of the sand is deliberately disguised,
Right. That's a massive, almost unfathomable filtering process. So what kind of gold dust, what kind of reliable information have they consistently found through this process that they now take for granted and actually work with? Can you give us some concrete examples, these repeated answers that survived all that scrutiny?
Sure. They cite several pretty compelling examples of information they now consider consistently reliable because it's appeared across countless sessions for years, allowing them to build like a working knowledge base.
Okay.
This includes incredibly detailed physical descriptions of extraterrestrial beings, like the gray.
Ah, the Greys, classic.
Right, but the consistency is key here.
Mm.
For instance, they consistently describe them as being between, say, 2-3 feet tall, with a distinctively strange, almost spindly body. Their skin is repeatedly perceived as greenish gray.
Greenish gray, okay.
Their eyes are large and almond-shaped, completely black. They have slits for a mouth, nose, and ears, no visible genitals, and consistently fewer than 5 fingers on each hand. It's a very specific biological profile that has supposedly been replicated across many sessions.
So not just vague impressions like you said, but really concrete physical attributes? That's quite striking.
Exactly. And similarly, they report consistent descriptions of reptilian-like beings, often taking on lizard or snake forms, sometimes humanoid but with reptilian features.
Reptilians too, okay.
And insectoid beings, specifically resembling a praying mantis, sometimes with multiple limbs or segmented bodies. Again, very specific forms coming up repeatedly.
Any other examples beyond beings?
Yes. Beyond physical forms, repeated information includes the consistent perception of the color of Mars being red, which, okay, sounds mundane, we know Mars is red, but it's something that held up consistently in their sessions. More esoterically, they've found consistent descriptions of non-physical etheric undergrounds beneath major cities, especially where power and energy are concentrated. It's like this invisible energetic infrastructure running parallel to our physical world.
Etheric undergrounds. Wow.
And finally, specific types and shapes of implants found in different body parts, often described down to their precise geometric configurations or the materials they appear to be made of. These are all presented as concrete examples of what they deem reliable because of these consistent, repeated answers from many different individuals across many sessions spanning years of investigation.
That's quite a specific and frankly pretty unnerving set of consistent data points they've collected. But what happens if the subject they're trying to investigate, doesn't want to reveal information? Or maybe there's no direct connection to the hypnotized person. Does that throw a wrench in their gold dust collection process? Is there like a way around a cosmic firewall?
That's a really interesting point. And yes, it adds another layer of complexity to their method. They talk about this concept of subliminal authorization.
Subliminal authorization?
The subliminal part of a being, maybe their higher consciousness, their soul, whatever term you prefer, might not permit certain information to be revealed directly. Or maybe it's just not in resonance with the inquiry.
Okay.
However, they explain that if an entity already interferes with another being,
Interferes how? Like energetically?
yes, energetically, metaphysically. If there's already interference, it essentially creates an energetic open door, a communication channel that apparently cannot be avoided unless it's consciously severed or annulled by one of the parties.
Ah, I see.
This allows questions to be asked through the interfered individual, even about the interfering entity itself. It's almost like using a compromised phone line to gain access, metaphorically speaking.
So interference creates a kind of vulnerability for the entity being investigated. They can't just hang up the phone.
Precisely, that's the perception. But if there's no interference or direct interaction with the subject being investigated, information might just not come through at all. They describe it as hitting a complete wall.
Like a locked door, no key.
Exactly. Or, and this is where it gets tricky, in a more cunning scenario, a cunning entity, as they put it, might take advantage of the inquiry. It might pose as the requested information source and provide distorted, manipulated data for its own benefit.
Like disinformation from the other side.
Basically, yes.
Yes, eh?
A deliberate disinformation campaign. And this reinforces why their rigorous multi-session cross-referenced approach is deemed so necessary. To filter out not just noise, but also intentional distortions, blockages, or, energetic misdirection.
Yeah.
To try and find those consistent common threads they consider reliable. It's described as a constant battle against energetic static and subterfuge.
Okay, now, with this truly unique filtering process in mind, where only this tiny fraction of perceived info is considered gold dust, Let's shift our focus. Let's dive into the central figure of our deep dive today, Pope Francis. The consistent perceptions around him, unearthed through these countless sessions, they paint a picture that is, well, to put it mildly, radically different from his public persona.
That's putting it mildly, yes.
We're about to delve into a narrative of his life and death that is just filled with layers of hidden meanings and truly startling revelations. The first, really startling perception involves his death. Multiple sessions converge on this idea that Pope Francis's official death announcement on April 21st, 2025, Easter Monday, did not align with his actual demise.
Correct. That's a very consistent point.
So what specific perceptions emerged about his true death and the timing of the public announcement? And why Easter Monday? What was the significance there, according to these sources?
Well, the perceptions of his true death vary a bit in the details. Some say a few days or a couple of weeks earlier, others much earlier, some even pinpointing February of that year.
So definitely earlier than the announcement.
Yes, consistently earlier. But what's profoundly fascinating here is that the sources consistently agree the choice of Easter Monday for the public announcement was anything but coincidental. It was meticulously planned, perceived as a gambit, a grand scheme.
A scheme? For what purpose?
The explicit aim, according to these sessions, was to leverage the blissful, joyful, holiday atmosphere of Easter, to then create a maximal powerful energy and spike of terror among the faithful when the news finally hit. This specific timing was seen as designed to really amplify the emotional output.
So it wasn't just about the news itself, but the energy generated by the faithful's reaction, like harvesting the shock and grief.
Exactly. That's precisely the perception. This energy, described as a potent mixture of fear, sadness, anguish, anger, feelings of abandonment, was then perceived as being captured or diverted.
Captured.
Yes. It formed, according to these sessions, a massive gray egregore around Earth, specifically linked to the Catholic religion and his prayers.
An egregore, can you explain that term briefly for our listeners?
Sure. An egregore is essentially a collective thought form, an energetic construct, kind of like a shared consciousness, created and sustained by a group's intensely held emotions and intentions. So in this context, it's perceived as this giant self-sustaining energy field born from the fear, the grief, the prayers of millions reacting to the Pope's death announcement.
Wow. So the announcement itself becomes an energetic event.
Absolutely.
Oh.
It was viewed not as a mere announcement, but as a deliberate ritual and an offering of the Pope's body back to their God, whoever that might be in this context.
Yeah.
Part of a larger strategic power shift or transition in the global energetic landscape. The death of a king, as they put it, implies a profound ritual connected to a very powerful moment energetically to set the stage for future steps in some grander plan. It's a far cry from just a simple passing.
That's a truly chilling interpretation of what many would see as a solemn global event. It suggests a very deliberate, almost esoteric purpose behind the timing, like a carefully orchestrated energetic harvest.
That's the perception, yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Speaking of hidden aspects, what did these sessions reveal about Pope Francis's own esoteric makeup? His very etheric DNA, as they call it, and his origins. The sources hint at something strikingly non-human here.
They do. Perceptions of Pope Francis's etheric DNA are, as you say, strikingly varied in the specifics, yet consistently non-human in essence, suggesting a deliberate, perhaps engineered composition.
Etheric DNA, just to clarify, that's not biological DNA, right?
No, exactly. It's important to clarify that.
Yeah.
When they refer to etheric DNA, they're not talking about biological strands we'd sequence in a lab. Instead, it's perceived as an energetic blueprint, a non-physical signature that reveals the deeper, often non-human origins and influences on a being's essence. So it's about his energetic composition rather than his physical genetics.
Got it. So what were the perceived compositions?
Well, for example, one session described him with 20% reptilian DNA in this etheric sense. Another perceived him as a mixed species, specifically noting 20% human, 60% reptilian, 20% Draco. A very precise blend.
60% reptilian, 20% Draco.
Yes. And a third session even suggested a completely artificial, robot-like artificial construct for one perceived version of Pope Francis.
One version, implying there were multiple.
That's the implication from some of these sessions, yes. Suggesting multiple versions or facets to his being, perhaps clones or energetic duplicates used for different purposes or public appearances. It adds another layer of complexity.
Multiple versions, that's quite a leap. So he wasn't just one static being in their perception.
That's the implication from some sessions, yeah. Yet another session saw a powerful draconian energy and a dragon form within his etheric DNA, alongside just a small, sort of technical human percentage, purely for the purpose of incarnation in a human body.
So the human part was minimal, just functional.
That's the idea.
Hmm.
The overwhelming implication across these varied sessions is one of a deliberate creation, of being modified and prepared to fulfill a specific predetermined role within a larger agenda. He was perceived as designed to be on a different level from most human essences, specifically stripped of emotions to facilitate his function.
Stripped of emotions, making him an ideal detached instrument, perhaps?
That's exactly the picture painted.
Yeah.
An ideal detached instrument for those perceived to be controlling him from behind the scenes.
The idea of multiple versions or an artificial construct is certainly unsettling, and being stripped of emotions paints a very different picture from the grandfatherly public persona. But perhaps one of the most intriguing and specific stories from these hypnosis sessions details a mind control implant. Tell us about this and how it allegedly influenced Pope Francis from a remarkably young age.
Yes, this is one of those deeply specific individual stories that provides a unique and, well, pretty unsettling narrative. One session describes an implant located in Pope Francis's mental body functioning explicitly as a tool of mind control.
In his mental body, so not physical.
Not necessarily physical, more energetic or etheric, affecting the mind. This implant was perceived to be activated in his last life, referring to his recent incarnation as Jorge Bergoglio, when he was just a child of 11 years old.
11.
The perception was that this activation occurred during a religious class at school. The individual in hypnosis described him having experienced a nightmare the night before, and after praying about it, he felt better. This precise experience, the nightmare, the prayer, the relief, apparently clicked something within him.
A trigger event.
Exactly, leading him to believe at his core in what he was reciting in that religious class. Essentially, this traumatic event, followed by a perceived religious solace, was the trigger point for the implant's activation, locking in a specific belief system.
So it wasn't just a technological thing, but tied to a psychological and maybe even a spiritual opening or vulnerability.
That's how it's portrayed, yes. The implant itself was visualized quite vividly as a pair of hands that take his head and just keep it straight.
Like blinders.
Exactly, effectively creating tunnel vision. This tunnel vision, according to the perceptions, made religion his absolute sole focus and consistently guided his actions throughout his life, ensuring unwavering adherence to a particular path laid out for him.
So it locked him onto that religious path.
That's the claim. And what's even more striking is the perception that this implant was so central to his being, so fundamental to his function, that a study was apparently conducted after his perceived death to analyze changes in his physical brain.
A study on his brain after death. Why?
Seeking better consistency in his actions, essentially. It's perceived as a direct link to the mind control mechanism itself, almost as if they, whoever they are, were performing quality control on their own engineered asset, trying to improve the technology or understand its effects better for future applications.
Goodness, that's a truly unsettling revelation. An implant creating tunnel vision from childhood. Does the method offer any insight into whether that tunnel vision means he genuinely believed in his public role? Or was it more like an automated function, devoid of personal conviction? How did the sources distinguish that?
That's a really great question. And the sources don't provide a direct, explicit answer to that specific philosophical nuance, the nature of belief under such influence. However, the consistent emphasis in the sessions on him being stripped of emotions and an extremely obedient instrument, well, that strongly suggests more of an automated function, almost like a perfect, compliant vessel for a predetermined agenda, rather than a being driven by genuine personal faith or conviction as we might understand it.
So more like following programming.
That's the implication. His actions were seen as driven by the program, the implant, not necessarily internal free will or deep personal belief. And given this perceived influence, the sessions also offered insights into who Pope Francis was ultimately serving, or, as the sources put it, his gods.
His gods, plural.
Yes, he was perceived as being extremely obedient to entities out of this world on the metaphysical plane. The sessions described him quite graphically as worshiping and praying with his head very bowed to his God and obeying very negative commands.
Very negative commands. What kind of entities are we talking about here? Did they get names or descriptions?
Yes, some perceived names came through, including YHW, which, could be interpreted as Yahweh, the Hebrew name for God, depending on interpretation.
Okay.
And also Ra, the ancient Egyptian sun god.
Ra. Interesting mix.
It suggests perhaps a succession, or maybe layers of power, with different names representing different energetic frequencies or historical periods of control, all converging into a tiny group at the very top of a pyramid of control.
And what were these entities like?
These ultimate entities were described in stark, often disturbing terms. Reptiloid figures mixed with some kind of demonic, and characterized as very ugly, very powerful. The implication is a deep, hierarchical structure of control operating at a metaphysical level, to which Pope Francis was perceived as being deeply subservient, acting as a direct conduit for their will on Earth.
It sounds like a complex and, frankly, rather dark web of control extending way beyond just human politics. Did these sessions offer any insight into his health or public perception in the period leading up to his perceived demise? Was his illness just a natural progression, or was there more to it within this esoteric framework?
Well, interestingly, the sessions indicate that his perceived popularity actually decreased over time.
Huh.
They attribute this decline partly to slander and shifting public opinion, which, from their esoteric perspective, is significant because it reduces the energetic flow, the attention directed towards him.
Less energy feeding the structure.
Exactly. But more notably, his illness accelerated, specifically after the Recognito ceremony on December 24, 2024.
The opening of the holy doors.
Precisely. The symbolic opening of the holy doors of St. Peter's Basilica, which is a profound ritual signifying a new Jubilee year. This acceleration of his illness was perceived not as natural progression at all, but as a direct punishment or consequence.
Punishment. For what?
The reason given was that he did not fully agree to certain planned actions that were demanded of him. He had apparently become a potential threat to the entities he served.
He pushed back.
That's the perception. He had previously cooperated within what they considered acceptable limits, fulfilling his role. But when the dark forces, as they're termed, demanded much more at one moment, something significant, he reportedly refused. And this refusal, this deviation, led directly to his elimination.
Elimination. So they're implying his death was orchestrated because he refused an order.
That's the strong implication from these sessions. It paints a picture of a very tightly controlled existence, where deviation from the grand plan resulted in severe, ultimately fatal consequences. It emphasizes the absolute obedience expected of him.
That's a truly stark and, yes, terrifying portrayal of a controlled and ultimately fatal existence. What about the Vatican itself, then? Beyond just the Pope as an individual, did these sessions shed any light on its internal dynamics, its hidden workings, its true purpose within this whole esoteric framework?
Oh, absolutely. The internal structure of the Catholic Church was described quite vividly as a microcosm that is just rife with jealousy, covetousness, and betrayal.
Sounds like any large human organization, maybe.
To an extent. But the perception here is that this internal conflict isn't just human failing. It's leading to what's perceived as a slow self-destruction from within. And these sessions suggest this might even be by design.
By design? How so?
It serves to maintain control by keeping its own members internally focused, bickering amongst themselves, preventing a united challenge to the larger hidden system that might be pulling the strings. This creates a perpetual state within the state, fiercely guarding its internal power structures. The primary directive becomes self-preservation above all else.
From the scandals.
The rigorous hiding of all scandals is perceived not just as damage control, protecting reputation. It's seen as an active, continuous function, essential to prevent disruption to the larger power structure it serves. It's about maintaining a facade of sanctity while actively protecting a deeper, perhaps darker, agenda.
So even the internal turmoil, the infighting, potentially serves a purpose for these controlling entities, maybe generates a certain kind of energy.
That's exactly the perception. This internal strife is seen as creating a continuous energetic feed, a kind of low-level hum of negative emotion, jealousy, betrayal, power struggles that these entities can then siphon off. Furthermore, the persistent patriarchal structure, where women are described as still in the background, is seen not just as a cultural tradition, but possibly as an energetic choice, maintaining a specific type of masculine hierarchical energetic flow within the institution.
How would that serve them?
It reinforces the established hierarchy and actively discourages new, potentially disruptive spiritual energies, perhaps more associated with the feminine principle, intuition, connection from emerging, that might challenge the status quo. It keeps it a closed system, self-reinforcing its own energetic patterns and serving as hidden masters, according to these views.
Okay, so moving beyond the specific details of Pope Francis and the Vatican's internal politics, how do these revelations fit into the broader cosmic puzzle? What do these deep dives tell us about the larger geopolitical situation, ancient prophecies, and the very nature of religious control on a global scale?
Well, what's truly fascinating here, and quite challenging to traditional views, is that prophecies, particularly the well-known last pope prophecy attributed to Malachi, are perceived not as genuine, preordained divine truths at all.
Not real prophecies. Then what?
They're seen as deliberate tools of manipulation. The sources consistently suggest these prophecies are specifically designed to arouse fear, maintain control over populations, and crucially, distract humanity from what's truly happening behind the scenes energetically.
So like psychological operations.
Essentially, yes. That's the framing. The idea that the last pope will preside during a period of great turmoil leading to the fall of Rome and the end of the papacy, well, that's deemed not fully true. It's seen rather as a signal of a change in form.
Change in form of what?
A change in how manipulation occurs. A subtle renewal, maybe. Not a true apocalypse or cataclysmic end for the controllers, but an evolution of their methods of control.
Okay, so less a divine revelation and more strategic psyop, as you said. What about the specifics in Malachi, like Petrus Romanus, the destruction of Rome?
Right. The Malachi prophecy about Petrus Romanus, bringing about the destruction of a city with 7 hills and the final judgment. That's interpreted entirely metaphorically in these sessions, not as a physical event destroying Rome.
Metaphorical how?
It's seen to signify a transfer of power, a loss of power for the Vatican's traditional visible influence, a transition from old form to new. It could also refer symbolically to the global tragedies and disasters that we observe happening around the world, wars, pandemics, climate events, which are then used to generate the very fear and energy that sustains these controlling structures.
So they leverage real-world crises.
That's the perception. And ultimately, the entire Judgment Day concept, so central to many religions, is perceived here as solely existing to instill fear in people, to force them to pray, to give energy, willingly or unwillingly, thereby sustaining the existing energy structures and keeping humanity in a state of energetic contribution to these unseen forces.
Wow. So, prophecies framed as sophisticated control mechanisms. That's a stark reinterpretation of something so central to many faiths. Now, following the perceived death of a pope, the next conclave is obviously a pivotal event for the Catholic Church. What insights did these sessions offer about the upcoming conclave? Is it truly a sacred democratic process or something more predetermined?
This is where the perception gets particularly cynical, I suppose, from the perspective of these sources. The future conclave, the gathering to choose the next pope, is consistently perceived as nothing more than a performance, a theater.
Just for show.
That's the idea. The sources emphatically state that the cards are already dealt, and the decision is already known, long before any cardinal steps into the Sistine Chapel to cast a vote.
Predetermined. But they mention power struggles.
Yes. Interestingly, there are still perceived power struggles within the Vatican's elites, described as a war, even. A war between those who, perhaps surprisingly, understand the manipulation to some degree and might seek to change it or at least influence it differently, and those who wish to rigidly maintain the status quo, adhering strictly to the old system and the existing powers.
So a genuine internal conflict, even if the ultimate outcome is fixed, like vying for position within the predetermined structure.
Exactly, a power struggle at that elite level. Furthermore, a powerful breath, described sometimes as a gray cloud or just a palpable non-human energy, is perceived as actively attempting to control the conclave itself.
Controlling the cardinals? How?
By sowing confusion and manipulation among the participants, influencing the atmosphere, the thought processes, the discussions of the cardinals. This suggests an outcome that is not only predetermined in terms of the chosen individual, but also heavily influenced during the process by unseen non-human forces, ensuring the right person is selected to serve the larger agenda moving forward.
Okay, if the next pope is already chosen and the conclave is just a performance, what specific details emerged about this incoming figure? What is their perceived nature, their role, their very composition? This sounds like it's going to be even wilder than the narrative about Francis.
You are absolutely right to anticipate that. The next pope is described with truly striking, almost science fiction-like details in these sessions. He is possibly perceived as a black pope.
Which traditionally refers to the head of the Jesuits, right?
It can, yes. Or it could be interpreted even more metaphorically here as a pillar of black, suggesting a dark, cold, and highly structured energy, an embodiment of a very specific, perhaps heavy, kind of spiritual force.
Cold and structured. And what about their makeup, their DNA?
His perceived DNA is equally unusual, if not more so. 60% extraterrestrial hybridization, specifically a mix of Draco and reptilian energies, with the remaining percentage being described as humanoid and human.
60% hybrid, Draco and reptilian mix.
Yes. This indicates, in their view, a being that is artificially enhanced, technologically altered, and deliberately designed for a purpose.
An extraterrestrial hybrid that truly redefines what a spiritual leader could be in this context. And what about his abilities? You mentioned Francis being stripped of emotion. What about this one?
What's truly fascinating and perhaps alarming are his perceived abilities. He is seen as capable of bilocation.
Bilocation, like being in two places at once.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
Appearing in two or more distinct physical locations at the same time. This isn't just about astral projection in their view. It's about a perceived physical presence in multiple spots.
Okay, that's...
And he can also apparently appear as a hologram in multiple places simultaneously. While looking 100% real, these projections or manifestations reportedly feel extremely cold and like metal to the touch if someone were to interact with them.
Cold and metallic, like technology.
Precisely. This suggests of being worked on through artificial technology as a result of an evolutionary process for his particular race, making him one of the highest of his kind in terms of their capabilities and technological integration.
So who is he then? Not just a priest, surely.
Definitely not. His role is perceived not as that of a traditional high-ranking priest who came up through the church ranks, but explicitly as an infiltrator.
An infiltrator. From where?
From the highest circles that allegedly run the planet energetically and perhaps physically, he is meant to be the bridge. To transition the old form of control associated with the traditional church to the new form, leading humanity through the predicted turbulent times of change into the next phase of this grand unfolding plan.
An infiltrator with hybrid DNA, capable of bilocation and appearing as a hologram. This is, far beyond any traditional understanding of a religious leader. So what's the grand, overarching plan behind these significant shifts? Behind installing someone like that? How does it relate to humanity's future on a global scale, according to these sources?
The overall goal, as perceived across these sessions, is described as a fundamental change of the general functioning system of the planet, which, maybe surprisingly, also includes a general awakening of humanity.
An awakening? That sounds positive.
Well, it's framed differently here. This isn't portrayed as a natural, organic, spiritual evolution arising from humanity itself. This awakening is presented as a carefully managed redirection of human consciousness, orchestrated to redirect our faith track.
Redirect our faith track. Towards what?
Towards introducing a new order, or perhaps eventually a one-world religion by unifying religions. It's about consolidating spiritual energy and belief under a single controlled banner.
Unification as a form of control.
That's the perception. And a key part of this involves subtly accustoming humanity to the existence of the outside, meaning acknowledging extraterrestrials and superior forces publicly.
Disclosure, but controlled disclosure.
Exactly. This slow, gradual introduction is deemed absolutely necessary because, according to one perception, if it were done too quickly, man would commit suicide, simply unable to cope psychologically and existentially with such a sudden and profound revelation about non-human presence and influence.
So a controlled awakening and a forced unification of religions, all designed to acclimate humanity to non-human influence, but at a pace they think we can handle without completely breaking down. What happens if humanity doesn't cope as planned? Is there a contingency mentioned?
The sources don't explicitly detail the consequences of humanity not coping well, but the strong implication is that it would significantly disrupt the careful transition they're trying to orchestrate. It would likely lead to more chaos, more overt control measures, perhaps.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, as part of this new order, non-human hybrids and reptilians are foreseen to eventually take their place openly within society, integrated into human DNA and structures. Though, perhaps only the elites would be fully aware of the depth of this subtle genetic and societal integration initially.
Hybrids living among us.
That's the foreseen future. This grand plan across multiple sessions is repeatedly perceived as already written or predetermined, a long-term strategy that is now actively unfolding on the world stage.
The idea of a subtle, technologically driven manipulation of collective consciousness extending even to the Vatican itself is absolutely mind-bending. I'm intrigued by these technological devices you mentioned earlier. Can you elaborate on what these sessions perceive them to be? How do they supposedly operate? And how do they tie into leveraging events like the Pope's death?
Sure. The sources suggest that the Vatican and related powers maintain a significant degree of collective consciousness control through sophisticated technological devices.
Actual tech.
These devices are perceived to be located deep under Vatican, within its foundations, possibly utilizing the ley lines or energy vortexes the area is built on.
Yeah, what do they do?
They are perceived to function by broadcasting specific frequencies, subliminal messages, maybe even complex sound patterns, which infuse thoughts or emotional states directly into the collective human mind. This capability was apparently intensified, especially after the fall of communism in Europe, maybe as other forms of large-scale control lessened.
What kind of thoughts or feelings?
The purpose mentioned includes things like inverting the general well-being, which means they subtly generate restlessness, anxiety, a feeling of unease in the population, making people more pliable, more easily managed, more obedient to external narratives and authorities.
So, a perpetual low hum of societal discomfort engineered to keep people off balance and compliant? That's disturbing.
It is. And symbols are also crucial here, not just technology. They're perceived as being hidden everywhere in decorations, in religious art, in architecture, used as physical means, physical anchors, to insert energy into metaphysical ones, into the energetic field.
Why does that work?
Rituals, specific dates like Easter, mass events like a papal funeral or election, these are all leveraged to catalyze and collect human energy. Particularly raw, powerful emotions such as grief, admiration, devotion, fear, obedience. All this energy is gathered for their purposes.
Or what are their purposes?
One specific purpose mentioned is to enable heavier entities, darker non-physical beings, to more easily embody here on Earth or at least exert greater influence. The symbolic timing of the Pope's death announcement, as we discussed, served precisely this purpose, a massive, globally coordinated emotional outpouring captured and redirected as a colossal energetic offering to these entities, fueling their agenda and facilitating their manifestation or influence in our reality.
Wow. The idea of technological devices and hidden symbols controlling collective consciousness is a profound and deeply unsettling claim. Given all these perceived changes and manipulations, what do these sessions suggest about the long-term future? The future of the papacy and the Vatican itself, say, in 30 years? What's the ultimate fate of this ancient institution in this unfolding new order they describe?
Right. Looking forward about 30 years, to roughly 2055. The perceptions presented in the sessions vary somewhat in the specifics, but they consistently point to a dramatic, almost unrecognizable shift for the Vatican as we know it.
Oh, so?
One possibility foreseen is that it becomes merely a tourist museum, completely stripped of its former religious and political influence, just a historical relic of a bygone era, much like ancient temples are today.
A museum. Or
a much darker vision, perceived as a place of fire, suffering, and filled with disincarnated consciousnesses. Perhaps an energetic wasteland resulting from spiritual conflict, or a place where negative energies congregate.
So either irrelevant or actively negative space. And the papacy itself, the Pope.
The papacy as we know it, the singular figurehead, might very well not exist in that future. Instead, it could be replaced by a group making decisions, a council, a collective leadership, some kind of more decentralized system perhaps, but still ultimately controlled.
So no more individual pontiff setting the tone.
That's a strong possibility emerging from these perceptions. The future generally, within this framework, is portrayed as darker, in the sense that non-human influences are integrated more overtly into religion and global structures.
But you mentioned an awakening earlier.
Yes, and that's the paradox. There's also a concurrent perception of a new type of spirituality emerging, an evolutionary path that people are actively seeking, feeling a disconnection from the old, rigid religions.
People seeking something new.
Exactly. But it comes with a significant caveat in these sources. Even this new spiritual quest, this individual searching for meaning outside the old boxes, might still be subtly manipulated, albeit in new, more sophisticated ways perhaps, ultimately serving the same underlying agenda, preventing true spiritual autonomy and just redirecting the energy flow.
Wow, okay, that's a lot to unpack. And just to reiterate, the core idea seems to be that the very energy we generate, our fear, our prayers, our focus, even our opposition, is perceived as the fuel for these systems. Across these various deep dives, some really powerful common threads emerge, don't they? Offering this unique perspective on belief, power, perception, a central recurring theme is the immense power of human attention and energy.
Precisely. That comes through again and again. The sources consistently emphasize that human attention is the absolute fuel for these energetic structures. Where you focus, you feed. is a core tenet here. It's that simple, apparently.
How does that work exactly?
Our thoughts, our emotions, our collective awareness, they generate a potent form of energy.
Yeah.
And unseen forces or entities can then collect and use this energy, often for purposes that are perceived as against humanity, or at least serving their own non-human agendas.
And this includes all attention, even negative.
Yes, that's the critical point. It includes the energy generated not only by obvious things like fear and prayer, which are massive collective outputs, but also, critically, by opposition to these systems. Any focused attention, whether positive like negative like hate or fear, or even neutral like intense curiosity, contributes to this energetic battery they tap into.
So even fighting against it feeds it.
If the focus remains on it, yes. The sources highlight how all prophecies, threats, words of dread, political conflicts, media narratives, they are meticulously designed to create a specific, impactful resonance on the subconscious of people, whether they are active believers in a particular system or not. By focusing our attention on these external narratives, whether in belief or in defiance, we unwittingly contribute to their energetic manifestation and empower these structures. It's a system that thrives on our engagement, no matter the form that engagement takes.
That naturally leads us to the big question then. If external systems are constantly trying to siphon our energy and attention in this way, what can you, the listener, actually do? What's the underlying message here about reclaiming personal power in this perceived cosmic struggle?
It's a crucial question. The underlying message, though it's not always spelled out like a self-help guide, consistently points towards the profound importance of individual awareness and cultivating inner strength as the ultimate countermeasure.
Inner strength and awareness.
Yes. The core insight seems to be that if humans collectively stopped giving attention to the church, to the popes, to this structure, or any similar controlling structure, really effectively starving it of its energetic fuel,
Then what?
then they would more easily make contact with their inner strength, their own decision-making power. This withdrawal of energy, in turn, would cause the external structure, like the Vatican in this example, which is perceived as directly connected to the energy of the faithful, to literally lose power. Its energetic foundation would crumble.
So the advice is basically disengage.
Essentially, yes. The consistent advice bubbling up from these sessions is to stop giving energy, stop giving attention to these external structures, narratives, and dramas, and instead consciously turn the gaze inward. Recognize that the power to create a better reality, or at least navigate the current one with more autonomy, resides within each individual.
Turn the gaze inward.
And this also inherently means actively challenging our own deeply ingrained programs and beliefs. The anchors, as one source called them, that keep people tethered to old systems, causing them to essentially give away their power to external authorities or narratives without even realizing it. It's really a call for radical self-sovereignty, for reclaiming your own energetic signature.
It sounds like a call to a profound personal revolution, really. What about the larger energetic shifts at play? Are these external forces always successful in their manipulations, or is there a dynamic, evolving struggle? Is humanity just a pawn in this, or does our awakening, our turning inward, actually make a difference in the grand scheme?
There's definitely a clear perception of a continuous struggle, or even a war, happening in the energetic realms.
Yeah.
This was seen as particularly evident since the Pope's perceived departure, which apparently created a kind of void or power vacuum that different factions, perhaps human and non-human, are now scrambling to fill.
And this energetic war reflects our world.
Exactly. This energetic conflict is seen as a direct reflection, or perhaps even a cause, of the geopolitical chaos and uncertainty we see playing out on the physical plane. While there is clearly a strong drive from certain forces for a new world order and this one religion concept,
Yeah.
the sources suggest that the ultimate success of this agenda depends significantly on human reaction.
Our reaction matters. How?
The controlling entities are perceived as constantly observing how people react to events, to narratives, to the changes being implemented, and they adjust their plans accordingly. They apparently have plan B, C, and so on, depending on our collective response.
So we're not just passive recipients.
Not entirely, no. A key insight is that the awakening of more and more people, meaning individuals becoming more aware, questioning narratives, reclaiming their inner power, makes it genuinely harder for these forces to maintain control. There's a noticeable decrease, apparently, in the energy supply they were used to receiving.
They're feeling the pinch.
That's the perception. This perceived panic from the dark energies is driving them to try and make reserves of energy and work on new plans, because their traditional energy sources, based on fear and blind belief, are dwindling as consciousness shifts.
So the shift is real.
The overall shift is portrayed as a slow, but ultimately irreversible process. It indicates a dynamic and evolving energetic landscape where human consciousness plays a critical active role, not just a passive one. Our collective awareness, our choices about where we put our attention, truly has power in this model.
We've truly taken a deep dive today, exploring some absolutely extraordinary perspectives on power, belief, and the unseen influences that might be shaping our world. The sources we've examined present a really challenging view of global religious structures and figures, suggesting a reality far more complex and maybe stranger than meets the eye.
It's definitely a lot to process.
From the meticulous and yes, somewhat terrifying methods of investigative hypnosis they claim to use, to the intricate details of a pope's perceived hidden nature, his engineered essence, and the strategic planning of a new world order, potentially orchestrated by non-human forces. These sessions paint a picture of a universe where human consciousness is a valuable, indeed a coveted resource.
Consciousness is currency almost.
Exactly. The common threads running through these diverse accounts, the deliberate manipulation of fear, the strategic timing of events, this constant struggle for human attention and energy, they offer a provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over. If these perceptions hold even a sliver of truth, if our attention really does fuel these structures, then perhaps the most powerful act you can undertake is to consciously redirect your focus, to pull it back from the external narratives, the fears, the dramas, and turn it inward. What might truly shift in your personal reality, and perhaps even ripple out into the collective one, if we all began to consciously choose where to place our attention and energy, disconnecting from what no longer serves us and truly embracing the profound, sovereign power that lies within each of us. Something to think about, isn't it?